The rototiller. Ooh. I used to love the rototiller, and I still use it sometimes. But when we started farming, that was the only tool that we had in our toolbox. And it was fantastic because you would go and cultivate the soil to 10-inch deep, and then might stick my whole hand into it, and I was like, wow, this is great. Like if I was a root, I'd be happy because it's really loose. But what you're doing is that you're taking soil aggregates, your soil structure, the structure of the soil is the aggregates in your soil, okay? And then you're putting everything in a blender, and then you're pulverizing the soil in finer particles. So it's really loose, come back the week later, compacts, because all your aggregates are now destroyed. So if you do this, once a year, it's okay. Like, it's probably never going to be like problematic on the long run. But if you're using it like I was using it, like to clear the beds of weeds or debris, or to have good seed beds for the seeders that we're using, I would go like 3 or 4 times on each bed. And do this for, let's say I have 3 successions on my farm, which we do have, and I'll talk about it later on. So that's like 7-8 passage of rototiller per bed. And after 4 years, the soil is going to be completely depleted. The organic matter is going to be burned. So you'll need to put a lot more. So we got around thinking that we needed another option. And that's why we found the harrow to be such an effective tool for permanent beds. The harrow has tines on a vertical shank, and it's not tilling, it's just mixing up the soil. So you're not inverting the layers, and you're still preparing super nice seed beds. Because the challenge in all this is that you need to be seeding or transplanting, mixing compost, whatever. And so you need to have seed bed preparation that is really nice. So this tool is called a power harrow, and it's a great, great tool. So we were looking for this, again, for a small tractor. It was crazy. Back then, these tools weren't popular at all. Now they're becoming more and more popular. But just try to find one for a tractor. They're expensive. So they have a roller in the back, so you can adjust the depth really easily. And so you want to be cultivating on 1 inch or 1.5 inches. And when you're using the harrow, it's not full speed. It's just kind of like mixing the layers, like that. Yes? Well, that's the thing. If you have rocky soil, do you have rocks like on the first 2 inch? And what kind of rocks? If it's like big boulders like this, by going at a slow speed, it's not going to kick. It's perhaps it's going to move the rock, but if you have rocks at that depth, you should remove the rocks, actually. That's how I see it. But because we have a lot of pebbles and smaller rocks on our garden, it's filled. Now you'll see in later pictures. But we're just using it on let's say we're transplanting, just to make sure that the soil is loose enough so that it speeds up the process of transplanting. We'll be working at 2 inch, but usually it's the first inch that we're working. Okay? So permanent beds, that's the starter, and then broad fork, and then. So what's great about these machines, and now they're coming more and more popular, is that you have one engine for different aberrals that you can put in the back. So it's like the power unit of the farm is just a Honda engine, and you can adjust the wheel, and you quickly change the tools that goes in the back. If you come to my hometown, people are cruising down the street with these. Not really, but I imagine that. And hay balers, whatever. You could visit the earthtools.com site. There's crazy implements you can put with these walking tractors. Very different from the old Troy-built that the pioneers had. The organic pioneers would farm with these old Troy-builts. These ones you can reverse the handlebars. Certain tools are better. Certain tools are better up front, others in the back, so that your wheel tracks are not into prepared soil, and it turns on a time, so you turns like whatever, because there's one wheel that locks when you want to turn it. So great machines. And I always need to be careful how I say this, because I've had problems. You could get in trouble. I can get in trouble. So everybody on the farm can use it, which I think that's well said, eh? And that's important, because 60% of the new farmers, or the new small scale, they're women. So this is an appropriate tool for this kind of system. And you can work your tan. Why do I keep this there? I don't know. Anyway, that was one of my employee for a year, and he wanted to have the full tan on his whole body. It's crazy.
He was in the wrong climate for sure.
All right, so I used to dig the beds with a shovel. And now we use a harrow, not a harrow, a rotary plow. So it's a plow that takes the dirt from the aisles and shoots it onto the bed. And so that speeds up the process like 50 times.
So when you're creating a new bed now, you're just using this to till,
Yeah.
and you're not doing any, isn't that wonderful?
I think so. I'll show you the sequence, the bed preparation sequence as we go on.
Good.
So look at the beds, how clean they are. And an experienced eye would say, okay, JM, there's something wrong with the picture. This is too clean to be true. Either you've plowed and disked many times, or you've rototilled out of it, or you've put herbicides or something, but this is clean stuff. And the answer is here. Tarps. We use tarps on the farm to do the bed prep. And we came across this technique a bit by chance, because one year I was covering the beds in my tunnels, because I didn't want weeds to infest the beds before I was ready to plant. And then what I observed is that the two beds that were, they were planted at the same time, and one bed had been tarped, not the other one. The one that had been tarped for a couple of weeks had almost zero weed pressure compared to the other one. It was like, whoa, what's happening here? And it was, I thought that the tarp was doing something. So I looked it up, and in France, this is like a long-term, honored strategy called occultation, which is what you're doing is you're covering the soil with black tarps, and it retains the moisture that is coming up from the soil. Because it's plastic, it doesn't breathe, it just traps the humidity. And then it's warmer because of the black tarp, and it's dark. So all of the dormant weed seeds, these are like the perfect germinating conditions. So all the dormant weed seeds, they germinate because it's dark, it's moist, and it's hot. And then what happens? They die because there's no light. So we were thinking, aha, this is great, because we're not doing anything and we're weeding the garden. So I bought some big kick-ass tarps, and I started to cover whole field blocks, thinking, yeah, let's get rid of the weeds without doing anything. I was fully excited about this. Spent $2,000 buying these tarps. My wife thought I was nuts. And then one thing leading to the other, we realized that when we would remove these tarps, man, it was ready to be planted. It was, there was, all of this had disappeared. The crop debris, the weeds, crop residues, whatever, it was clean and ready to go. And that was a big, big aha moment for us on our farm. Because that's when we started to imagine not a no-till, but a minimal tillage practice. because you have the permanent beds and then you have this tarp, and then you haven't worked the soil at all, and it's ready to be planted, and it's weeded.
This is before you broad forked or anything?
I'll show you the sequence in the next slide, okay? So that was for us something huge, and we've been banking on this way of preparing seed beds ever since. So landscape fabric, it's not the same. The tarps that we're using are UV treated silage tarps because landscape fabric breeds, and so it doesn't trap the humidity, so it doesn't allow, for the dormant weed seeds to germinate. Okay? So there's a difference there, and this is a lot more expensive.
Do you have a favorite supplier?
Yeah, I do have one in Quebec. They're kind of bummed that I say that because everybody's calling them, and it's costing them more to ship these tarps than they're making money out of. But if you look up my website, all the tools that we use, they're all indicated where we get it from. Dubois Agrinovation. Okay? So tarps. And for us, that was a game changer because it was kind of tying everything down to not working the soil, letting the earthworms operate, because earthworms, that's the environment they want. When it's tarped, it's dark, it's moist, and it's humid. Like, it's nighttime. So they're working day and night. You're tricking them to work because they're thinking, yeah, this is great. It's what I want. No predators, no birds, and so tarps. Yeah, question?
Yeah, what do you use staples to hold it?
Well, you see, because the beds are raised, it creates like anchors that when it rains, it just holds everything down. So we bury the edges, and then if it doesn't rain, we'll put a couple of sandbags, and then that's how it holds down. So has anyone in the room had never heard about using tarps to do this? Some of you guys. Like, try it, okay? Try it for yourselves. It works wonders. It really does.
How long do you need to leave them on?
You leave them depending on what's coming up next, how clean the beds are or you want them to be, but usually from 2 to 4 weeks is the time that, and in the fall and in the spring when it's colder, they don't work as well. Yes?
Have you used this kind of system to kill off winter rye before, because it's just unbelievable?
Yeah? Like, we weren't using rye anymore because we couldn't get rid of it with the rototiller. I would rototill like crazy, like destroying my soil to get a green manure in. Like, I was defeating the purpose. When we got the tarps, it was just like, yeah, fine.
You leave it on for like a month over winter rye,
It's
basically lifted, it's just dead winter rye and some soil.
So these are all the tools that we've kind of put in our toolbox now to replace the rototiller. The permanent beds, and the broad fork, the harrow, and the tarp. And so the sequence and the tarps. The only drawback with these tarps is that they're heavy. And if my wife would be here, she'd say, yo, JM, don't forget to say that because they are heavy. The bigger the tarp, the heavier it is to move around. And we want to have big tarps because you have 4 edges to a tarp. May it be a tarp that is 5 feet wide or 60 feet wide, it's 4 edges to bury. So if you have lots of small tarps all the time, you're spending a lot of time burying those 200-foot edges. So we want to streamline that. So the only way we got around that is to buy more tarps. So every field blocks, they each have the 2 tarps per field blocks, which in the end ends up being like $3,000 of tarps. It's okay. We've done this over time. So here are the sequence of the bed prep on our farm. So it starts with the permanent bed and covered with a tarp. So when we remove it, it's ready to go. No disking, no plowing, no whatever. So I give espressos to my crew.
How do
just like you saw. So now I'm putting the rotary plow on my BCS. So every other year I raise my beds because they tend to settle down. So I'm using the dirt from the aisle to raise my beds. So I'm not worried about what I'm doing to my aisles. You know, my aisles, I'm walking in them, whatever, but the dirt I'm putting onto. And then I'm using the broad fork, and see how it goes in smooth. It just goes in because the soil has been covered and because we've not been turning the soil for many years. And so, you know, I see a lot of people that tell me, yeah, JM, broad fork, I've tried it, and it doesn't work for me. It doesn't work, my soil doesn't work. It doesn't work in my soil. Anyway, so when I hear that, I'm like, no, the problem is not the soil. It's not the broad fork. It's you need the broad fork. If you're having a hard time broad forking, you need to broad fork. Okay, so that's really important. And then we've moved away from compost that we used to buy that was really rich in organic matter content, because now our organic matter is so high that we're using vermicompost. We're using, you know, 1/10 of the same material, and this is like highly, you know, potent vermicompost. I'm adjusting the height of the harrow, offsetting my handlebars, and that's going to prepare the seed beds in a very sharp way. You missed a couple of jokes, but that's it. You can get in.
So you're purchasing your vermicompost?
From somebody that's specializing in that. So that's how we do the bed prep on the farm. And coming back to the numbers I was presenting you this morning, $260 of gasoline, is because we're not using any fossil fuel, or almost none, to do all of this. In the greenhouses, that's a common area where I see a lot of crazy things happening. Like, I don't want to go with my with my walk-behind tractor in my greenhouse, because just to turn at the end, I'm going to lose all that space. And, you know, greenhouse space is valuable. So we use a tilther. That was, again, developed by Elliot Coleman and his friends at Johnny's. And it's the same principle as the harrow, but it's really working on the top inch to finally prepare the seed beds. So then I can use my seeders. A power drill. Yeah. Yeah. Very hard for me to say because there's H's and T's, and I get confused with that. So in our tunnels and greenhouses, your beds, your alleyways should be 12-inch to maximize the space. And you don't want to lose any space to tools that would turn. And you should, like, one thing, and I don't want to be a bummer with this, and I see people designing tunnels so that the tractors can get in. Like, this is crazy. So you're heating, let's say it's crazy if it's a greenhouse. If it's a tunnel, that's fine. If it's a greenhouse and you're heating it, and you have these big doors that can't shut properly, you're just losing so much. You're losing money because, you know, the heat is going off all these doors that are not well shut. You're better off with a service door that is really tight, and then you work with smaller tools inside your greenhouse. If you go to Holland and say that you're putting a tractor in a greenhouse, these guys would, you know, they would think you're crazy. So, before we take a lunch break, I'm going to talk about how we do the. Oh, yeah, question?
Yeah, one more
Because I want the beds to be level, firm, and flat so that the water gets evenly distributed if it rains. And
You would just reek.
I can, you could. But again, I think there's something to say that when everything is level, you just create the same environment for everyone. And I don't have much more to say about that. Perhaps because my mind likes it square. But you don't need that. And you know, the harrow could be replaced with a shallow tillage. You know, I have a picture. I have a rototiller now that has a roller in the back. And I could till the first inch, just like the tilther does. Because a harrow is like more than $2,000. So it's a great tool, but sometimes, you know, people don't have that money up front. So there's alternatives, and you know, perhaps not having everything perfect is, when you're transplanting, not so necessary. Green manures and cover crops. You guys, you're lucky you have 2 words for these. We only have 1. It was a big dilemma for many years for us because everybody is like super stoked on green manure, and they have green manure programs, and we were like, well, if I'm using green manures and I'm rototilling them in, then I'm kind of like, I'm putting organic matter into the soil, but I'm, disturbing my soil. What's better? And it took us quite a few years to figure that out. First of all, we knew that we needed a shredder, a flail mower, to bring the cover crop into finer particles, into a mulch. And then what we ended up finding as a solution is that instead of, incorporating the residues into the soil, we're just burying it with the soil that we take from the aisles with the rotary plow. So it's the same thing. You have buried residues, but you haven't rotor-tilled. Does that make sense?
The weeds don't go through?
And then you cover it with a tarp.
Did you say you mow it first and then?
Yeah, you mow it because that speeds up the decomposition. And that experiment is pretty cool because I would always wonder, what really happens to everything that's there? It kind of disappears. But where does it go? And somebody told me, it's the earthworms. They come in, they take it. And I left some popsicle sticks. And then I would find popsicle sticks in the ground. So these guys, they come up, they take, and they bring it down. So it's really fantastic when you think about that. All right, make sense? So we're not putting cover crops in our aisles because my equipment works on 30-inch and it doesn't work on 18-inch. So I just don't seed it, and I keep them clean using a rototiller to cultivate the aisles. And so that's how we do that. So we have a cover crop program, but we don't have a green manure program. We don't need to have organic matter added to the soil that way. It's a lot easier and effective to put compost, on this scale of farming. And cover crop I want because I want the soil to be covered, and I'm interested in the root systems. Because the roots is what you're generating, and then everybody chews on the roots that are there. So there's a program on the farm where every 3 blocks, instead of having a succession, I have a cover crop before or after. So I have like 3 field blocks that are in a cover crop half of the year. And since there's a rotation, it takes about 10 years. It's going to be like if every field blocks will be in a full year cover crop every 5 years, which is good enough for us. People that don't have a flail mower, you can use a weed whacker but that's going to take a long time. You should have a Kickstarter project, do a naked calendar or whatever, just raise the money to get the tool you need right away because it's going to save you time, and time is what you don't have on your farm, especially when you're starting out. So what time do we have now? Okay, so we're going to stop at noon. You guys cool? We can go on? Any question with how we prepare seed beds? Does that make sense to you guys? Is that crazy or?
Do you mind just, you said you don't use green manure.
Yeah.
You use a cover crop.
Yeah.
So the cover crop is. how is
It's the
that
same thing. It's
different?
because green manures is the idea of growing leguminous
Yeah,
to put into your soil
right.
to add benefits, to add nitrogen or organic matter. And I'm not really concerned about that because when I'm putting compost, I'm doing that.
Sure, okay.
But
So why are you doing the cover crop?
well, because I want the soil to be not exposed.
Oh, okay.
I want it to be covered.
It's weed suppression.
I got it.
And I also want to have root systems that are, digging up in the soil, loosening it. So the difference in words is for the usage that I want to get out of that strategy.
So are you using like rye or?
Yeah, rye. I'm using.
So anything that's a green manure, you're just using it as a cover?
Yeah, but since I write words, they have meanings,
Yep.
and so there's a nuance between both.
Right. The purpose for which you were doing that is
Is what defines in the word
to keep the soil from being
exposed
exposed.
Yep.
And washing away.
and washing away.
But
So
then the tarp goes over that
Yep.
cover crop.
yeah, try the popsicle thing. It's,
Yeah,
it's really neat.
Yeah, definitely. Now,
Yes.
Do you think the tilther, the outlet culling tool, could be useful outside? Like if you didn't have the BCS and you weren't going to do a harrow, could you use
Yeah, if you farm like a quarter acre or fifth of an acre, perhaps. Yeah. Yeah.
not any larger?
Well, it's just because when I go with my harrow, I'm going to prepare 8 seed beds in 20 minutes. If I use the tilther, it's going to take me 2 hours because it's maybe not 2 hours, but it's longer. I'll need to change the batteries. It's just not as efficient. But you can get off with it for sure. But it's not made to run for a long, long time. The battery wears out pretty fast. And when you have rocks, it jams all the time. And it's just, I hate it for that. So, yes?
End of the season, anything that's not in the cover crop, you cover it with your black tarp.
Or landscape fabric. Or if there's a crop residue, I'll just leave it there. So I'm aiming for it to be covered. It happens sometimes that certain blocks are, because I present this as if it's all perfect, but this is like we aim. This is how we operate. But sometimes there's certain parts that aren't covered. But definitely leaving soil bare. If you've invested, $15,000 over 10 years to create soil, it's just a bad idea. So we talked about margin this morning, and the 45% margin that we have on our farm equates to 2 realities on our farm. And the first one is that we've limited the labor. And we did this, that's kind of built into the size of the farm, but we like it that way because when I was attending conferences, and I've attended a lot of conferences over the years, there was always a panel of veteran growers. And you would always hear one of them say, my employees make more money than I do. I don't know if you've heard that before. Like I've heard it so many times that I was like, well, that's not what I want because I'll go and work for you then, And on most organic farms, 50% of the expense is labor. So there's no right way around that because people need to have decent salaries, but our margins are high because we've limited our labor. The labor we've kept the labor expense as our salary. We're paying ourselves. So that's one explanation. But the other one is like the startup to get all of our equipment and our system going was a negligible capital outlay out first. It was just like when we bought all of our tools, it came about to be like $40,000. And we and we got a grant even to get started. So all the tools that we bought the first year, we've been farming with them ever since. And so they've been paid for a long time ago. And so that also, I think, when you're getting into farming, makes a difference. Okay? So some of the tools that we've used a lot, precision seeders. You know, Modelen was doing it by hand, and then we've replaced her with these kind of machines. It's much faster. The Ertway, everybody knows. The Ertway works really well for peas and beans and, you know, bigger seeds. We use the Glazer seeder for smaller seeds, brown seeds, and carrots, whatever. It works really well if you have a clean seed bed. And a clean seed bed is like the key to these seeders. And a clean seed bed is, you know, a harrow level firmed, and then you rake the debris and the small rocks, and then you're ready to go. Under $100 each. The Jang seeder is like a major upgrade. It's more expensive. The drawback that I find is that, let's say I have 5 different crops that I'm seeding. Well, it takes time to change everything. So, but that's definitely a great seeder. We have targets when we're seeding, because, you know, you're seeding and you're just hoping for the better, but you don't really know if it's pooping the right way. So again, coming back to the bed as a unit of measure, we've seeded many times carrots, and we were measuring the seed package before and after. That gave us the amount of seeds that went into the soil, the ground. Like, let's say carrots is 70 ounce, and then I would see that the density was perfect. So I would write density perfect, 70 ounce. And those became the targets. So now when I seed, I'm measuring the package before and after, and I have a target, and if I'm way off, I know that I need to calibrate my seeder, or I need to put more seeds or whatever. But at least I know what's happening. This is the 6-row seeder. A lot of people don't like it. I think it's great. You need to have perfectly prepared seed beds. And you can go up to 12 rows per 30-inch with that tool. Firming the seed beds is important because that's what gives traction to the seeder. So in the greenhouse, this is, again, it was developed by Johnny's, and it's a great little seed bed roll. We tried so many stuff. We would pull like parts of chimneys. And I love it when people, I'm a big fan of not do it yourself. Like, I'm a proponent of cooperating with tool designers that are professional because the outcome is better. And so when tools like these come around for $200, it's like, thank you. This is great. I love it. This is changing my life. And so we mark our rows. This is obvious to me, but sometimes I've been to farms where they don't mark their rows. And it's important that you mark your rows because they need to be symmetrical. They don't need to be straight. Like you see, like probably somebody was talking to me and I say, well, and then, but they need to be symmetrical because the next step in the process is cultivating the soil for weed prevention. And the way to do this fast is that you have your hoe and you're eyeballing one row, okay? So you can go really fast. And if you're eyeballing this row, you need to assume that the tool is not in the other row. So this is like 101, but it makes a big difference. And we mark our rows with these tubes, PEC tubes that I carry in my pocket, so it's easy to change from 3 to 2 to 4. Okay, so what time do we have now? 10, okay. So you guys okay? All right. A little bit on weed prevention, and then we're going to stop. You know, I told you guys, I've been to a lot of conferences, and I'm still going to a lot of conferences, and the big attraction is always finding the best tools for weed control. You know, people will line up to hear about the newest technologies, finger weeders, robot cultivators, whatever. And everybody's kind of like focusing on how to control weeds. And I think that on a small scale, on a market gardening type, you should be looking at weed prevention to not deal with them. And there's different ways to go about this. And on our farm, we followed two simple principles. We never let the weeds go to seed. Never. Nowhere. Because when that happens, you multiply this problem. Like the Galansoga, 40,000 seeds when it goes into flower. That's crazy. So that's like the first principle that we've tried to follow. And the other one is that we're not weeding, we're cultivating the soil. So we're going with the hose when it looks like that. When, the weeds are starting to emerge or they're really small, and then just the action of moving the soil destroys them. And you're adding air into the soil. The plant feels good, and you're connecting with the plant. So we followed these two guidelines, and obviously the close spacings really help because the canopy shades it out at one point. We're transplanting all that can be transplant. We transplant because we have a head start over the weeds. And we're using different hose for different jobs. So, when you get the hang of it, it's pretty fast. So perhaps a tractor setup would do this faster, but it would, it would cover more ground. So again, I should stop talking about tractors comparing. That's just how we do it. And after, a few years of doing this, you can get really fast and efficient at it. Wheel hose, obviously, they're great. We use them in the pathways. We don't put cover crops in our pathways, or because we want to use the soil, the dirt from to use to anchor the row covers and the insect nets. If we don't do that, then we have UV treated sandbags. And I calculated this once. I think I would need 5,600 sandbags if my whole farm is under row cover. And, they're $1.50 each, so the dirt is great for that. So we cultivate, and if it gets to be too weedy at one point and grass starts to grow, I'll go with the rototiller, and then I'll till in the aisles. This is a new tool that came out 2 years ago, the Tilly. It's an electric wheel hoe. Next slideshow, perhaps I'll have more stuff to talk about it. And we've managed to keep the farm pretty clean. Photoshop helps. But so cultivating at the right time when it's sunny, being on it everywhere else so that when it's time to cultivate, you have the time to do it. And not letting the weeds go to seed, but that's easier said than done. There's a bit more to it. We stale bed. We prepare the seed beds, and we try to pop up the weeds and then destroy them pretty much every time. We also use a flame weeder a lot, especially for carrots. And for some of you that perhaps don't know this, the way this works is that you prepare your seed bed 10 days ahead of your seeding date. You water it, you cover it with a row cover, with clear plastic, whatever. And then 10 days later, you seed your carrots. The carrots will take from 8 to 12 days before they germinate. And so you water, you cover. And then if you follow through like this, the weeds have like almost 20 days to get established before the carrots. And then just before the carrots are ready to emerge, you go with your flame weeder and you destroy the weeds. And so what will happen then is that you have carrots emerging in a weed-free bed. And that saves you all the trouble of weeding carrot beds. And so, like this picture is my favorite picture in the world because I'm so proud of this. Like I'm growing weeds. This is just fantastic. Can you grow better, nice-looking weeds than that? Beautiful weeds. And then you destroy them.
Does that flame weeder come with a backpack for
Yeah. This technique is amazing, okay? But there's a drawback that if you don't flame weed at the right time and your carrots start to emerge, then you're, okay?
I'm just gonna ask you that, there are carrot seeds in the ground.
Oh, yeah.
right now.
Yeah. They're going to pop tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I know they're going to pop because I've put a bunch of beet seeds at the start of the bed. And so when I see all these purple leaves starting to emerge, that's my indicator that carrots are coming the next 2 days. Because in the same conditions, beets will always grow before carrots. So that's my indicator. So, and the other thing is that the flame weeder needs to be like this. It has, on 30-inch, you need 5 flames to make sure that you have enough BTUs under any weather-like circumstances. If it's hailing, if it's raining, if it's windy, you know, your carrots will emerge regardless, especially if it's super wet. So you need to have enough power to really destroy the weeds even if it's, you know, pouring rain. And that's why it needs to be in a closed box also. If it's windy, you know, to make sure that your flame really goes down. Okay? So that's another way we do this. We also use plastic mulch. And so that's biodegradable plastic mulch. For crops that are like 100 days or more, like all the nightshades, it's a worthwhile investment because then you're going to weed the holes 1 or twice in the whole summer and then you're done. So the only thing with these is that we haven't really figured out how to lay them well. Like it's time consuming and the result is not perfect. Like a tractor would really make them tight. And we're trying our best, but we're really amateurs at doing that. So it might change in the future. We might get a plastic mulch layer for the BCS. And so over the years we've done that, and then we went, we said, well, why don't we put landscape fabric in the aisles so that we wouldn't need to cultivate the aisles. And then that led to just, well, why don't we just put landscape fabric all over and to reuse landscape fabric. So that's what we're doing now. We have, every year I know that I'm going to, be planting 6 beds of bell peppers. So I have a landscape fabric that covers 6 beds, and I've made holes according to bell peppers for these 6 beds. And so that's really sweet because that just takes care of the weeding problem. No weeding in the whole season. And the next year, man, it's super clean because the tarps, they just don't allow things to germinate. After lunch, I'll get back to that. We've kind of looked at how to take this even further in weed prevention because we were doing salad mix with the 6-row seeder, and we didn't have any tools to cultivate between the 12 rows. So I really got interested in how to not have weeds at all. And so I'll share that after lunch if you want. Okay? Thank you for your attention. A full day workshop is a long day. And I want to tell you guys that I'm going to really give it my best to try to be entertaining. Because after lunch, sometimes it's like, whew. There was a lot of great questions that were asked to me during the lunch. And I think it might be good that we take, a few moments, just kind of revisit certain things and or open up discussions about what I've presented this morning. I can start off with, this man came to me and said, what do you think about the spader? We have a spader on the farm. You know what spading machines are? They're not rototillers, they're like big spoons or spades that just kind of work the soil that way. And the idea is that you're not inverting the layers too much. And he was asking me what I thought about them. And my response is that they're very aggressive. And for a walk-behind tractor, they weigh like 10 million pounds, which is a big problem. This could work, But if you could just do without all of that, you know, and think about the earthworms, basically is my answer. Think about the earthworms. Because I'm a strong believer that even the big farms, they'll go with biological tillage in the future. I'm sure of that, because it makes so much more sense. So, yep,
You mentioned you're switching some from compost to vermicompost,
yep.
and what's the fertilizer difference?
Well, instead of putting 40 pounds, it's like 10 times less material for the same results. But I'm not building the soil with organic matter. I'm fertilizing, and I'm adding a lot of microbial life to the soil. Which at that stage where I'm at now, this is what I need for my soil. Because the organic matter is already there. So there's stages. You know, you build up your soil, and once it's built, you maintain it, and you keep it active and alive. Because it's the alive factor that mineralizes the organic matter that's in it that makes it fertile. This is really annoying, eh? Yeah.
Do you ever grow crops that require different between row spacing, say like in the field, like tomatoes or winter squash? Everything you have there is laid out in nice 30-inch.
Oh, everything, all the beds are 30-inch, but the spacings is different for all the crops. So it might be 3 rows at 6, or 2 rows at 8, or 1 row at 9. They're all specific for each crop.
But like I plant my winter squash 6 feet on center on rows.
Yeah.
Do you grow winter squash outside?
Well, I don't grow a lot of winter squash because they don't work on 30-inch bed systems, because the squash will
Right,
overlap on the other one.
right, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
So you don't used to avoid those crops?
Well, the reason why I don't grow them is because they take a lot of time in the field, and all that time I could do 3 times lettuces. And when I go with my Rubbermaid, to pick up the squash, my neighbor, he has a tractor and a thing, what's the pallets, these things, and he just loads everything with a tractor, and I'm with my Rubbermaid. So I can't compete with that guy. He's like 1,000,000 times more efficient than I am. So I've moved away from all the storage crops. I'm not interested in growing them. I buy them from him. And I specialize in crops that need to be manipulated by hand. And as a market gardener, this is the approach that you should have.
So you have a CSA?
We have a CSA, so I buy the potato from him, I buy the winter squash, I buy the melons, and it's all good. Like, it's transparent, people know about it. If I go to market and nobody's bringing them, I can bring them myself, and I just advertise this guy, melons from Fred's, and it's all good. And yeah.
I was wondering about the difference between a flail mower and a power harrow. How much debris can the power harrow handle? Can you use it to chop stuff?
Well, no, the harrow is really to finely prepare the seed bed. The flail mower, you could go in a cover crop this is a heavy duty machine, really strong.
Do you use the flail mower for cleaning up in the end of the season, like cabbages?
Yep, all the crop debris, I shred them because it just speeds up the decomposition. So yeah, so I would say that the flail mower is like an essential tool to the market gardener. It's going to be hard to do without it because it just speeds up the transition. Because we're doing, and we're going to talk about that, we're doing successions, meaning that we're going from one crop to the other on the same bed in 1 year. So you need to speed up the process. Yep.
Could you just go into a little bit more detail? You mentioned that you hire an agronomist to help you with your soil amendments, and could you just give me a little bit more detail on what is involved with that?
Well, when we started the farm, we hired an agronomist because we needed to do soil sampling, we need to do a fertilization program, And, you know, for 4 years we were with that woman. It was great because she was touring all these other farms. And then she would come to ours. And then when we had problems, she would kind of know the solutions because she had visited all these other farms. So that was great for us. And after a few years, we didn't get a lot out of it, so we kind of stopped. And then 10 years later, when my book came out and everybody was trying to kind of pin me down and saying, you're putting too much compost, you're doing this, that. So we hired her again so that she can just validate scientifically that what we were doing was not crazy. And so, but pretty much, we looked at together about replacing our compost with vermicompost, trying to calculate how that could work. And that second part didn't go really well. Because at the level of what we're doing now, it's kind of uncharted territories. Like, you know, having 14 years of permanent beds in a mixed vegetable operation, there's not a lot of farms like that. And so how do you work these soils now? What's the next step? So we're kind of pioneering that. There's probably people that have done it, but there's not the scientific community is just not on par. There's still, the reports now are coming out, we should trial permanent beds. It's just like, are you kidding me? You know, so.